Welcome to A Study in Sherlock, the podcast where we investigate the many faces of Holmes and Watson. Each episode will take a closer look at the actors who step into the iconic roles, what they bring, what they change, and what they reveal about the world's most famous detective partnership. We'll review classic films, groundbreaking TV series, forgotten radio dramas, stage performances, and even modern audio adaptations. Some will be brilliant, some less so, but all of them are a part of the story. Because Holmes isn't just one character, he's a performance, a legacy, a puzzle that's still being solved. Whether you're a lifelong Holmes fan or just stepping into Baker Street for the first time, the game is afoot. I'm your host, Bruce McIntosh. I'm also host of the Just the Runners podcast. Been doing that for quite a while. I've taken on a new project here to discuss another lifelong, well, I guess it's kind of lifelong enjoyment, something I got a lot of joy out of, watched many, read many books, and now we're reviewing the many adaptations of Sherlock Holmes with my co-host, Eric.
Hey, Bruce, it's nice to be here.
Thanks. I'm glad
Oh,
glad you joined me.
thank you. Just for people who are listening, I'm also the host of Neighborhood Bookstore Podcast, where we interview authors about their creative process.
And just share a little bit, how long would you say you've been, or how did you originally discover Sherlock Holmes?
Well, that's an excellent question. I have been aware of Sherlock Holmes for as long as I can remember, Bruce. I know that when I was a little kid, my parents talked to me about Sherlock Holmes, so I was aware that he was a fictional character that existed. I can remember being a kid and going to a program at my local library, probably circa 1980, where they had a children's program and they showed us films. And one of the films that they showed us was Silver Blaze, which was a TV film from the United Kingdom starring Christopher Plummer. And I think it was the first non-animated film they had shown us. And I was watching it and there were, like horses and carriages. And I was like, what is this? And then they brought out Sherlock Holmes. And I was like, oh, Sherlock Holmes, I've heard of that. And so I got into it. I got really into it. And then not long after that, I was at my grandmother's house and one of the local UHF TV stations played The Hound of the Baskervilles starring Basil Rathbone. And then I really got into it. So I've been aware of Sherlock Holmes my whole life. I think I actually started reading the original Conan Doyle stories in junior high. Maybe when I was maybe even a little bit before that, when I was 11 or 12. And I just kind of kept up with it. And so since then, I've read all of the Holmes stories by Conan Doyle at least twice and probably more. Or at least the ones that are available in North America.
I think they're all available somewhere.
Oh, yeah. The funny thing is, and I know this is a dogleg from today's discussion, there are European collections, particularly French collections, that include 2 additional stories that are not typically in the complete Holmes as we know them, because they don't actually feature Holmes, but they are Holmes stories. He's a background character.
That's a new one on me.
Yeah.
I've always considered the canon the 60 stories by Conan Doyle.
Yep.
And then I have no clue how many pastiches you could go into. Obviously, some more famous than other. I think it was one of the, going back with me, I knew a Holmes pretty much my entire life. Part of it was with my grandmother's house. I'd go there and they'd have one of the most famous pastiches from the 1970s, 7% solution on the shelves in the bedroom I stayed in. I always saw that. I didn't read it back then, and I did in high school. I was picking up all the paperbacks, the little, these nice,
Oh, yes.
mass-produced paperbacks.
Yep.
I had most of them back then, and I didn't keep them, but I did go back a couple years ago, looked on eBay, and found the whole set finally. It took me a while to get them all together, but I
Great.
if you ever look at them, I always like the artwork on the cover of these. And the other thing, I don't have that book with me. My grandmother, while I was in, I don't know if I was still in high school, just out. It was before she passed away in 80. She passed away in 88. But she had given me the works of Sherlock Holmes. A copy of it had the adventures and a few other stories. I think it had the Hound of Baskervilles. I still have it to today. That's the one book I've had pretty much most of my entire life where, well, no matter what, I had this. But it looked just the way they appeared in the Strand magazine when they were
Nice.
published there with the pictures and everything. And it's got the, I will have to bring that to you and let you see it sometime.
I'd
That's,
like that. I've seen some of those Strand illustrations. They're hard to beat.
yes, that's one of the uh, best thing about those old books or the stories. And some of the people have followed, we're talking about the actors who follow, some of them follow and try to look like the pictures and stuff. Mm. But over the years, it's come and gone, and I'd always go to see anything to do with Sherlock, any movies or anything. And my interest did get more picked up when Elementary and Sherlock were both coming out. That definitely. And then now years later, probably a little bit before the 18 or 19, I just got a very big renewed interest, and it kept getting growing and growing. I did eventually buy my own Tear Stalker, uh,
Fantastic.
and I have the
I
Inverness
almost
Gate.
came onto the podcast today with a pipe.
I
I don't
have a
smoke it.
pipe.
I just have it.
I have a pipe, but you can't even smoke out of it. It was just at a costume store pipe. So thought about doing that, and so over the last few years, my interest in it, like I said, grew. I bought more pastiches, more. I listened to other Sherlock Holmes podcasts out there. There's more than I realized, and
I'm sure.
I grew to this. And then I started thinking about it. Why not take a look into all the? I think we discussed it and came down to, instead of just reviewing the canon, let's take a look at all the actors that played Holmes. I mean, we're going to cover Watson also because they go hand in hand pretty much.
Yep.
And I really like that idea. And it's something I think I can really get into. Some of the shows are definitely going to be hard to find or watch because, well, we'll move on to what we originally were going to discuss today. If are you, or was there anything else you'd like to share before
Oh
we?
no, I'm ready to dive in.
We decided we're going to do a dive in on Basil Rathbone as our first one. His he had the right profile, the right piercing eye. These, from what I read about him, the voice was just what many people imagine, and for generations, the image of Sherlock Holmes was Basil Rathbone. Yeah, I know there's been some other talk about you can bring Jeremy Brad, Benedict Cumberbatch. They're like the two that, but I think it all, so many things got started with Basil
Oh
Rathbone,
yeah.
and a little bit about the man because he was born actually in South Africa as a English. He was British on
Interesting. I
June
did not know
13th,
that.
1992. I found that out through the one book I was reading, and his father was, oh shoot, he was working down there. I can't exactly remember when he was doing. I'm sorry, and he got accused of being a spy in Johannesburg. So he had to take him, and they took off and went back to England. Fear of, but he grew up there and would become a stage actor, uh, prominent Shakespearean. He was actually very well known for that at the time. And then he, during World War, he enlisted and went into the army for the uh, British and got stationed. He actually would end up winning a Silver Star. I don't know if you knew this about him or not.
I did
He won a
not.
Silver Star. He was going into no man's land. You know what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
At the neutrals. no man's land. He would sneak in there, made up like a tree with a few other people to get information on the troop movements for the Germans and things like that, and how he pulled that off. And then he'd get back onto his lines with the information and stuff. So I guess he was still acting because he was acting as a treat. But the fact that he won a
Well,
still
and if he was a Shakespearean actor, it probably was not the first time he acted as a tree.
sadly he had a brother John who was killed during World War I. So that would affect his life going on. But yeah, he won. It wasn't. Oh, he won. It's called the Military Cross for bravery during World War I. So,
That makes sense.
and then going forth, he would go into movies eventually. He did do a play. I believe it was in New York City, and I gotta get the name of it. I'm sorry.
That's
I
right.
thought I had it. Oh, but this was a very well. Let's just say risque play, or it was very controversial at the time. We're going back to the 1920s when this came out. Hang on. Rathbone was arrested in 1926 along with every other member of the cast of The Captive, a play which the character's wife left him for another woman.
Oh, that
Uh,
was very progressive for the time.
yes. And
So what must have happened? The entire cast got arrested because the society considered that probably pornographic at the time.
yes. And according to this, he was upset about the censorship. He actually believed it. And this, well, like I said, 1926, this was very open-minded progressive thinking that he believed the homosexuality needed to be brought into the opening. And one interesting fact about the cast of the play was Arthur Wagner, and he would go on in the 1930s to appear as Holmes in 5 different movies.
So there were two different homes in one play.
Yes, covering the play, like I said, it covered lesbians, which was a big scandal in New York City in 1926. Now it's all now you can wouldn't be a second thought if they put on something like that. Um, and
Well,
after
the play did its job then. It just took 100 years.
and one of he did go into movies, as you will know, and some
Mm-hmm.
of his famous ones. He played the son of Frankenstein. He played the Dr. Frankenstein's son in that movie, a horror movie, and he was in several swashbuckling adventure movies with Earl Flynn. And
Mm-hmm.
one thing I didn't realize, he was actually considered a very accomplished at
I've
fencing.
heard that. I've heard that. I have seen both of those films. So the Adventures of Robin Hood and I think Captain Blood. And Basil Rathbone plays a great villain. You know, and
Yes,
I've gotten the sense from people that in terms of those sword fights, even though Errol Flynn was obviously playing the hero, that Basil Rathbone was kind of carrying those fight scenes and doing a lot of what made them look convincing.
because when I'm read, when they fenced like Earl Flynn against Basil Rathbone, he got the best of Earl Flynn. And I guess he did a lot of help set up a lot of the fight scenes and stuff. And like you said, he was the bad guy. He was very accomplished at being the villain in those movies, and he's well known for it. And
Yeah,
one reason, ironically, one of the reasons he became Sherlock Holmes was to not get typecast as a villain.
that's funny. And then, like, arguably, he then got typecast as Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, eventually
it's,
this.
it's interesting to see people who are a victim of their own success that way. But I mean, he had a lifelong career. Like some people get typecast and then they sort of fade into the background, but he continued to work till the end of his life. So he may not have been that satisfied with some of the roles that he got later, but he did continue to work. And there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, because when he gave up Holmes, he was offered a very large sum of money, especially for that time frame, because they were willing to pay him close to $1 million to continue making Holmes movies. So they must have. And for 1946, I mean, I would do it now for that much money, but in 1946, that was very large money. Uh,
Oh
I'm not
yeah.
sure how many years they were paying him for, but because
Hmm.
he had because he well, let's get into the you ready to get into the Hound of the Baskervilles?
Yeah,
Well,
let's get
real
into
quick.
these movies.
And the first movie they made, The Hound of the Baskervilles, 1939. This actually, I was surprised. This was actually I think three of them were made in Germany, but this was the fifth time it was made into film.
Oh, interesting.
I know some of them were silent films, but
Hmm.
this is actually the fifth Hound of the Baskervilles. Uh,
I didn't
what
know
was
that. I did learn something interesting about that film, though. I had kind of assumed that Holmes productions were always staged as period pieces from the Victorian era. But I actually read this week that that 1939 film version of Hound of the Baskervilles was one of the first to actually be set in the past. And that up to that point, Holmes had always been depicted in whatever the contemporary time was that the production came out, whether it was a play or a movie, it was set in the day that it was released. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, I've read that too, and actually quite a few. So it's really like with the modern Sherlock and Johnny Lee Miller. It wasn't nothing new to move them into modern times.
Yeah, it's funny. I was like that, and it's fascinating to me because I was kind of under the impression that that was a modern invention, and that actually wasn't the case. But also, it makes sense to me because the books were obviously still in print and very popular. You know, in that sense, the character of Holmes was still alive in the public imagination. So there's every reason for it to be set in the time that the production comes out. It's like any crime novelist that we might read today, we wouldn't think twice about the film version also being set today. You know, so it's fascinating to me to think back and be like, okay, so like starting in 1939, they were like, this is a story that needs to be told at the turn of the century.
One thing is, only the first two were actually set in Victorian era. Uh, 1941, they switched, moved them up, and they put a. I remember they put something on the screen that Sherlock Holmes is timeless, and they started putting them. And this was they first were Nazi war propaganda against the Nazis, and had
Yeah,
him fighting Nazis for a few movies.
yeah.
One thing I thought was interesting for the Hound of the Baskervilles, they didn't give Basil Rathbone top billing.
I saw
Richard
that.
Green.
Yeah.
And I always thought it was interesting because Watson's such a big part of the Hound of the Baskervilles, or almost all your home stories.
all of the Holmes mythos. Yeah.
But he was he was listed fourth. Nigel Bruce, who played Watson, was listed fourth in this movie, and I thought it was interesting that your two top the whole movie is about Holmes and
Yeah, the two main
Watson.
characters are not listed first.
Yeah, uh,
That's interesting. Like I've often thought this as I've reread The Hound of the Baskervilles, that it's an odd Sherlock Holmes story because for half of it, Holmes doesn't appear. You know, it's really Watson's case. Watson is the person who's the boots on the ground, and most of his interaction, especially in the first half of that book, is with Henry Baskerville. You know, and in that scenario, Henry is kind of like the romantic hero, you know, because he's the one that comes in, he's the one whose family has the dark past, he's the one that um you know the the female lead is chasing. So it's interesting that the actor who played um Henry in this is listed first because it's sort of like um it captures the essence of the story even though it's a strange Sherlock Holmes story.
What I thought was about Richard Green,
Hmm?
that he was only 21 at the time.
Oh wow.
I looked it up and I'm like, he was really young. And here's Basil Rathbone had to be in the 40s by then.
Yeah.
Not mistaken. Yeah, he was born in, like I said, 92,
Yeah,
18.
1892 you said.
Yeah, so you're gonna by 39, he's already into the fort, and
Yeah.
he was accomplished. I know Richard Green must have been in something before that, and just for
We'll have to look that up. Like if he got top billing and he was that young, he was probably some kind of matinee idol. I'd be
yeah,
curious to investigate that more. You know, like
and
like the hot young thing that was up and coming at the time.
yeah, he was. I do know he went on. He didn't have as much success after as some, but he in the 1950s they did a Robin Hood, where he played Robin Hood. It,
Oh my gosh, I
Adventures of Robin.
remember that. Yeah, the that was a very famous Robin Hood television series. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that was him. Well, good for him.
Yeah, I just looking at it, I did a little diving into them, but that was because the first two movies are considered much stronger movies, better, well produced, taking place in the Victorian era. They had a much bigger budget. The two that were made in that, Hound of the Baskervilles and The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, they were
Well,
made
because
by 20.
they were made by 20th Century Fox, if I remember
Yes,
correctly, and um, they were definitely looking to do higher budget productions. I really like Basil Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes, and it's interesting because um, you know, as someone who was watching these in the latter half of the 20th century, right? Everyone, all the grown-ups that I talked to, Basil Rathbone was considered the Sherlock Holmes, you know, at that time. Like even, you know, even years and years after his passing, when people thought of Sherlock Holmes, they thought of Basil Rathbone, you know. And I think it's interesting and I think it says a lot about him because obviously there were plenty of people who played Sherlock Holmes in the 20th century, you know, in film, in television. I'm sure we'll talk about all of them eventually. But actors who were every bit as well known, like Peter Cushing and whatnot, played Holmes. But when I first started getting into Holmes in the 80s, if you talked about Holmes, people would come back to you with Basil Rathbone, you know. So like
yes,
he did set a very high bar. And I remember that when the Jeremy Brett show came out, that was the comparison, you know. People weren't saying how does Jeremy Brett compare to William Gillette or Peter Cushing. It was how does he compare to Basil Rathbone, you know. So I think that's kind of cool. I think that this version, his version of the Hound of the Baskervilles, might be my favorite because I've gone out of my way to see as many of the film versions as possible, and some of them are difficult to find. Um, and it's one of my favorite stories. Every version has something going for it, even if they're not all very good. Um, but in a lot of ways, I still go back to the Basil Rathbone one because I love his performance. I think that the interaction between Basil Rathbone as Holmes and Nigel Bruce as Watson is much more in keeping with the characters from the stories than the other films that they made together afterwards. Um, I really love how atmospheric that black and white film is. You know, it has a sense of mystery and it has a, you know, like a sense of gothic horror. You know, they really
yes,
went out with the matte paintings in the background and like the miniature models of Baskerville Hall and things like that. I just like it's charming, but it still works for me even now. You know, gosh, 80 years later, 85 years later.
yeah. It always worked for me. I always found it because in this one, I know Nigel Bruce would get a bad reputation. I don't want to say bad. Maybe that's not the right word of playing the fool or
Mm-hmm.
mumbling. But he didn't play it that way in the uh, Hound of the Baskervilles. That would come on more and has comic relief in the other ones. I think
Yeah,
he was
those
more true
Universal
to the part.
productions.
In the Hounds of the Baskerville, I still felt he was playing more the part. And if you look at earlier Sherlock Holmes movies, it was more like he was a side, just there once in a while. Some of the stuff, and he really brought Watson more as a part, more equal to Holmes, or closer
Mhm.
to being equal in that aspect. And he showed him what did to him with a kindness, and there was a just a general appeal for Nigel Bruce has
Yeah,
him,
especially in Baskerville, he's likable as Watson.
and and I still think they did do have Basil Rathbone dress up and go under disguise as that guy trying to sell it. And he was even able to fool uh, uh, Watson. So,
Hmm. Yep,
and,
which is in keeping with the book. Now, and I mean this version does not adhere totally to the original story.
no,
They make adjustments. All of them do. You know, the relationships between some of the characters are different. Some of the circumstances are different, but I really liked it. I I remember seeing it again at my grandmother's house as a kid, and I can still remember the first time Holmes gets locked in the Hound's underground kennel on the moors, and that whole sequence of him like being trapped down there and having to escape really stuck with me. I think that it lasted in my memory before I even remembered that it was a Sherlock Holmes film. So a few years ago, sometime within the last 10 or 15 years, I actually bought a DVD set that was a complete collection of the Basil Rathbone films. And when I was going back and watching them, um, that moment jumped out at me because I was like, I remember that from when I was a kid, you know? And it's one of those things that because I didn't remember where it came from, I was like, what movie was that? Or was that a nightmare I was having or what? But no, it was from that film. But seeing it again really lit me up.
yeah, because I was thinking about that. Because the two things that I know were the major changes, they had a whole scene where they did a seance, which is
Yes.
an, and I'm not sure if Arthur Conan Doyle would be that upset about that because I've read that he was into uh, that type of things.
he
I think he
was.
was,
He was a spiritualist. He believed in those
yeah,
things. So
for
I
sure.
think he would have been okay with that.
And the other one was uh, the Stapleton girl, the one that falls for Henry Baskerville. You know,
Hmm.
originally that was supposed to be Stapleton's wife, pretending to be his sister or something, and
And in this story,
changed
they switched it to she was his
a
stepsister, I think. Yeah.
stepsister so they could, yeah, it never worked
Yeah.
the other way. Not back in 1939, at least. And
Well, the original, there were plenty of things that you could get away with in print that you couldn't get away with on film. And so I imagine they had to walk it back so that it would be less scandalous. And given
oh
what
yeah,
you said about the play The Captive, I can see why. It wouldn't do for Sherlock Holmes to be getting arrested again.
no, no, not Sherlock can't get arrested. Uh,
It's interesting because these two 20th Century Fox productions, right? Um, I like the production values. I like the performances from the actors. I think that the Hound of the Baskerville film is very good. I actually do not particularly like the follow up that they made, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I think that Basil Rathbone's performance is good. Um, I don't like the plot of that because it was based on the play written by William Gillette,
yeah,
and the focus is Moriarty distracting Holmes with a series of crimes so that he can get away with a robbery, right? And I felt like Holmes was far too credulous throughout that film. He was too quick to believe like the red herrings that kept getting sent his way by Moriarty. So like I like the way the film looks. I like the performances. Um, I like the whole scenario with Moriarty falling through a trap door at the end, possibly to his death. It's left open. Um, but I don't. I was always a little bit bored by that film. I never thought that the plot quite got Holmes. You know what I mean? It's just my opinion.
Yeah, it's been a while since I saw that one. I didn't get a chance to rewatch it recently. But the one thing I remembered was they had Moriarty doing the actual theft. I'm like, no, he wouldn't do that. He'd have somebody,
Right.
unless he's like fighting with Holmes himself. I think he would have one of his, that's Colonel Moran's job or whoever.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
that was the
You know,
flaw. And I mean, and you can't kill off Moriarty because they were planning more movies, and obviously you're going to bring Moriarty back, which they did with like three different actors, or every time I think it was a different actor. Uh, because after 1939, there was a couple of years they didn't put one out, and then they finally. Do I have to list?
yeah. I had to look up the list too. There were 12 other films in the 1940s.
Yes, starting in 40, was it 41 or 42? But they were putting two or three out a year. But what kept it going was bromide. When Fox quit making the movies, it got picked up on the radio, which was incredibly more popular than it would be now, as far as
Yeah,
the
I think
radio.
that was people's primary form of entertainment and news.
And the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes became extremely popular. Uh, and that Basil Rathbone was in over 220 episodes of the New Adventures of Sherlock on the radio show. And I did re-listen to one of them, just a random one. And I've always liked the setup for the show because they have a host come on and he starts talking with Nigel Bruce as Watson, and Watson's going to tell you a story. And then it goes live action. And they have this, I don't, I don't know how to describe the music, but it was da 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 da.
Yeah,
I'm sure I'm
that really
butchering it.
dramatic 1940s music.
Yes, it was that perfectly. And then he'd tell you the story of whatever story he's going to, of the illustrious client, and it would go live, and then you'd have Rathbone and him discussing it, and let's go, they're going to investigate stuff, and then they'd end, and then cut into clips with, uh, I, there was an antacid involved. Oh, I want to say bromide, and then there's other ones that it was Petri wine, you know,
Oh wow.
and this went on till they went on at least till 46, 47. While they were doing the movies, they kept making the radio show. Like I said, 220 of them over this time period.
Didn't realize there were that many. That really explains to me why Basil Rathbone was considered the Sherlock Holmes in the latter half of the 20th century.
And
Because like he was doing a lot of different productions.
he was definitely the voice. He had become the voice of Sherlock Holmes for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There's been many other radio shows since or before, but I really think if these were definitely probably the most popular
Yeah.
uh, for a very long time. You
Yeah,
can
I think they
actually,
were far reaching too, because those the 1940s productions from I think Universal, they're shorter. They're like 45 minutes to an hour. So they were like B movies. They were never the main feature. You would go to a movie on a Saturday and they'd show you several hours worth of content leading up, like with the main event being a big film, like a 2-hour film, and you'd slap Sherlock Holmes into the front of it, right? And so they were kind of everywhere, but they weren't big productions, you know. But a movie of that length actually translates really, really well to television. And so I bet in the 1950s, those films made the transition to TV as well. Because you see that with other stuff too. Like Hopalong Cassidy was a long running film series, and then they started rerunning them on television because they were the right length, and they became so popular that they spawned new Hopalong Cassidy productions. Or like the Three Stooges had always been short films shown before a main feature, and they made their way to television. So it wouldn't surprise me if the same thing happened with Holmes. And so people probably continued to be able to see Basil Rathbone as Holmes long after he had retired from the role and after they had stopped making films.
It
So,
definitely helped carry it over. Uh, of the next 12 movies, were there any of them that stick out as a favorite for you?
they're a real mixed bag, aren't they? I the, those are interesting because I really like the look of those black and white productions, you know, and I like the costuming. Um, I would say there are a couple that stand out to me. The Woman in Green, I recall, particularly liking, and Dressed to Kill, I recall particularly liking. Um, and I'm not sure exactly what it was about them. It's probably just like the pace and whatnot. I think Rathbone continued to play Holmes well, But as you mentioned earlier, like in some ways, to me anyway, the measure of how well a Sherlock Holmes production is succeeding is how well they do Watson. And I really don't care for the way they handled Watson in those 12 films because that's when Watson became the bumbling sidekick. And they clearly didn't know what to do with him as a character. So they would find reasons for him to, he was comic relief. They'd find reasons for him
Yeah.
to be off screen. And they kind of turned Holmes, who is like an austere, ascetic type of guy, into kind of like the romantic hero and the action hero. So he's doing things in those films you wouldn't necessarily expect Holmes to do, you know. Um, but the thing that I liked about The Woman in Green is that I recall that they used elements from the Sherlock Holmes canon to set that up, which I like because some of those stories are original film stories, and some of them are loose adaptations from Conan Doyle. Um, and I remember really liking, and I'm pretty sure this is The Woman in Green, a sequence where Holmes sets it up so that it looks like he is assassinated, right? So there's like an empty house. He sets it up to look like he's sitting in a window behind a curtain, and a sniper shoots at the shadow through the curtain, like apparently killing Holmes. And I really like the setup of that because it struck me as something that the Holmes of the literary canon would do. Now, it's immediately followed by one of my most hated Watson moments because Watson turns into a hysteric screaming, "They've killed Holmes." And he runs in there and he's yelling at Holmes, who is clearly alive, "They've killed Holmes." So, like, he's very credulous and very hysterical. And I don't care for that Watson moment at all. But if you just erase Watson from your memory for a minute, um, it's a pretty entertaining Holmes story, and I like Rathbone in it. How about you? Are there any of those 12 films that stand out to you as a favorite?
I wish I had time to rewatch them all. I will say that much. I think it'd be fun to do a view of all of them. But for some reason, Scarlet Claw is kind of a horror picture. Uh, that one stuck out of my mind. That and I always liked the voice of terror because he's fighting Nazis and he had to stop. They were doing the radio
Mm,
uh, propaganda, and he was trying to
yep.
find out where they were signaling from. And uh, like I said, I never bought the bumbling fool Nigel Bruce playing that. I know they kept him on as comic relief.
Yeah.
So, and he was, Holmes's best friend and all, but it never made sense that army veteran doctor wouldn't be semi-intelligent.
Oh
uh,
yeah.
so I do think other portrayals were closer to the canon, but Watts, has a Watson. Like I said earlier, I did think he brought out Watson has a bigger part of the Holmes TV shows and movies going forth. So he did, there was something accomplished that. Um, I don't like him being the fool, but
Yeah.
Nigel Bruce, he actually stayed on the radio show after Basil Rathbone quit because he wanted
Oh,
to revive
interesting.
Holmes. And I can't remember they brought in a replacement. Obviously, it wasn't as good and they didn't last as long
Hmm.
without Basil Rathbone. But
It's interesting that they broke up the team, but the person who lasted the longest was Nigel Bruce.
yes, and
Yeah, you know,
that,
you're exactly right too, because like Watson was a soldier, right?
yes,
He was an army doctor, but even in the literary canon, he was wounded, and depending on how you read the stories, he was wounded more than once. So this isn't a guy who was hiding behind the lines. Like Watson of the stories had seen some stuff. You know what I mean? And my impression was always, regardless of how Watson portrayed himself when he was quote unquote writing the stories, he kind of always struck me as the man of action of the two. So like, obviously, Holmes sometimes carries a gun. Holmes has studied martial arts and boxing, you know, um, but in many of the stories, if one of them has to carry a gun,
it's
it's
Watson.
almost always Watson. You know what I mean? So like those movies did do Watson dirty, but it's nothing against Nigel Bruce. I think he was a talented actor who was, you know, bringing something to the role. It's just not my favorite. And I don't really think that that was in his control. I think that those filmmakers
So,
just didn't know what to do with Watson. It was also interesting to me. I had to look this up because, um, a lot of times in film and television portrayals of these characters, they're played by actors who are older. And in the reality, in the stories, especially in the early stories, they're quite young men. Like um, it's possible
30s,
that both
20.
Holmes and Watson are in their late 20s in A Study in Scarlet, or perhaps Watson is a little older, perhaps in his early 30s, but they're certainly still young men. And so I always had this idea when I was younger, watching the Rathbone films, that Nigel Bruce was, among other things, too old to play Watson. And when I looked it up in advance of our conversation today, he's actually younger than Basil Rathbone, which I did not realize. And so that's another aspect of like whatever he brought to the portrayal. He seems like a bumbling older fellow, but he actually was not that old. He was, younger than Basil Rathbone, but they were about the same age. So that was a surprise for me.
Well, they did try to come back in a play once years later, but
Really?
it didn't come off because Nigel Root he got sick and actually passed away, and
Oh darn.
Rathbone would not appear as Sherlock Holmes without his Watson. So I give him credit for that.
Wow,
And
that's nice.
he had a chance to make a lot of money coming. From what I read, he did not want to come back as Sherlock Holmes, and he took these other parts that were not up to what he was doing before Holmes, and it was kind of sad. But he didn't want to portray Holmes anymore, and held to it. And he could have made a lot more money. From what I understand, he started having financial problems and everything else.
Oh
But
gosh.
some
Well,
people
he
say
he
it was
stuck to
his
his
wife
guns. I have to give him credit for that. It was his wife.
that helped create some of his financial problems. Uh,
Oh, I
re-
thought you were going to say that didn't want him to play Sherlock Holmes.
no,
I'd say, I
I'm
see.
surprised she didn't talk him into it. Uh, Rita Rathbone, uh, she doesn't come out in the book I was reading about. I didn't get a chance to finish it. It's been a busy
What's the
week.
title of the book you were reading?
The Curse of Sherlock Holmes.
Oh wow.
Well, you can get it on Hoopla as an ebook, but that's where I was trying to get through a lot of it. But she doesn't come
What?
out looking the best in this book.
Oh,
But he did come back and make special appearances as Sherlock Holmes and stuff occasionally throughout. And he actually passed away in New York City in at the age of 75 on July 21st, 1967. I guess starting in his 70s, 60s, during 1962, they said he had started having heart attacks and stuff like that. So,
oh gosh. That's kind of the way things happened at the time.
yeah.
75 years old was old. then. So I guess he had
back
a
then.
good long life. Going back to what you said about those films from the 40s, I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on this because I have to admit, looking back now, like it is kind of cool having the opportunity to see Sherlock Holmes kick Nazi butt. You know what I mean? Like you really don't see that. Like if you wanted to see that, the only place you're going to get it are the Basil Rathbone movies. So like that makes them a very interesting artifact. I'm curious to know like what you thought of that.
I liked most of them. Some of them, like I said, obviously some were better than others. They had their faults, uh, but they were an enjoyable watch for the most part. And I did like when they put them fighting Nazis. Like I said, it wasn't uncommon to move Sherlock Holmes into present day. And yes, they were made for propaganda, but yeah, it was nice to see him do that. And it's so different because when you realize how many movies he was putting out per year, try getting Marvel movies to put out 3 Iron Man movies in a year. It's just not,
Oh, it's never going to happen.
no. But there were every year it was 2 or 3 movies from 41 or 42 to 46. There was 2 or 3 Sherlock Holmes movies. I know they were the B movie, but still, uh,
It's
so
still a
there's so
breakneck pace.
so I none of them held up to the Hound of the Baskervilles. Yeah, I know that many of them stole, loosely based the plot on different Conan Doyle stories, which sometimes can be hard to figure out how they did that. But I like I said, to me, Rathbone was, there's you can argue Jeremy Brett was more to the canon and stuff, but he Rathbone's always been my favorite, and he had the look, he had the voice, he had just the atmosphere around him. And like, I don't even like the colorized version. I want to watch them in black and white, but that's the way they were made. That's the way I think they should be seen. Uh,
And it lends to that atmosphere. Yeah, I'm right there with you.
uh,
So Rathbone is your favorite. That's interesting.
yeah, I mean, it's not a, I don't like Johnny, I like Benedict Cumberbatch. I like Johnny Lee Miller. I like Jeremy Brett. And in different state, there's so many good ones. There are some bad ones, but there's so many good ones.
True.
Different eras. Like if you want to watch a pure, you know, uh, to the book canonical by the, you probably do want to go watch Jeremy Brett. If you want a modern day one, you're looking at Cumberbatch or Johnny Lee Miller in Elementary, and I like both those shows. Uh, sub, in later episodes we'll get into it about the changes I
Hmm.
liked and didn't like.
Hmm.
But obviously, I think if Basil had wanted to, they probably would have made another 10 movies uh, if they could have kept him going.
Yeah, I can believe that. And
And
Bruce, I think that you summed it up perfectly too. Like there are a lot of different productions that they stray from the canon. They try to show you a different aspect of Holmes, but I think that where Basil Rathbone succeeds, and you really captured it succinctly, is that they weren't trying to show you something new about Sherlock Holmes, really. Like for all our talk about him fighting Nazis and bringing it into the mid 20th century and whatnot, what he was doing was he was trying to bring you the Sherlock Holmes that you would recognize. So, like you said, he had the voice, he had the look, he really went out of his way to play like the intellect of the character. Even when they had him do unusual things like flirting with women, right? It was always in the context of like his being a spy or a detective. He was never a Holmes that was hitting on women. He was a Holmes that was working on solving a crime and putting forth a subterfuge to
in the
make that
stories,
happen.
even though they always talk about Irene Adler being the woman, he never actually flirted with her. But he was engaged once. If you read Charles Augustus Milverton, he got engaged. It had nothing to do with love. It was just needed a way in, and that was what he did.
Yep.
Go flirt with the
So
woman. And
yeah, and I mean, like canonically. uh, Watson's more of the ladies' man. He has an eye for every, like, he has something to say about every woman that they encounter. He's married more than once,
Well,
so
there's some story. This where was I seeing it? Well, they were talking about apparently Watson's been with women in three continents or something. I'm like,
right. He does a little, like he does a little bit of bragging,
yeah,
and then it makes you wonder what they are, right? Because
and I'm
he's European, he served in Afghanistan, which is
Afghanistan.
in Asia. What's the third continent?
I didn't. Did he ever go to America? I mean, I never even heard of him leaving the country. As far as I knew, he stayed in Great Britain the whole time,
Right.
except for when he went to Afghanistan in the war.
Oh, so yeah.
So,
Well, I'm glad that we started with Basil Rathbone, especially now that
yeah.
I know he's your favorite. Which, I certainly understand. It's kind of like I do think he does a really excellent portrayal, and I also sort of think that Holmes might be a little bit like James Bond. That your favorite is kind of the one you grew up with. So I can see why you'd be into Basil Rathbone. I'm I like him. I'm right there with you. I wish that he had returned to the character in later years. I think that would have been fascinating to see. Um, it didn't happen, but we still have these 14 black and white films to fall back on, you know, and they definitely contributed something to the extended canon.
Well, you also have 220 radio shows.
Right, right.
Have you ever heard the radio show? Just out of curiosity.
It's funny. I feel like I must have, but I really don't have a memory of it. I'm going to have to look them up.
Just go on a podcast search. You could listen to almost all of them on a podcast right now.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm
Yeah,
definitely going to check them out. I'm curious about this.
like I said,
I'll be curious to see how the portrayals of the characters match the films.
I don't think they're too far off. They're portraying the same character. I think they're pretty close. They had to make some adjustments for radio. You have this host host. Like I said, I when I thought about it, the way they set it up was really good. I think it's perfect because it's Watson telling a story to an audience. Well, instead of writing the book, he's just up there telling them the story. So,
That's
which is the
great.
way it should be. It really shouldn't be Sherlock showing up, or they didn't do it just as, and then they, like I said, they go into the live action part of it. Uh, I think that's when I remember. I did do one re-listen just for old time's sake, but I can remember when I was much much younger. Uh, all right, well, I think we covered Rathbone fairly well. I'm sure he'll be mentioned again.
Yeah, I think it's likely we're going to be comparing a lot of people to Rathbone and probably also to Jeremy Brett. So
Yeah, I think those are probably your top two. I mean, there's other names
in a
mentioned.
lot of ways, but we'll see where the conversation leads us. There are hundreds of actors to choose from.
Okay, well, we'll get going. Uh, Glad we were able to get this started. And well, next time we'll continue investigating, looking into more Holmes, and well, we'll end it as Holmes might say, the game is afoot. I
Well
had one
said.